everybody. How's everyone doing? Feeling good? Concurrency? Yeah? Awesome. I think we've been sitting for a little bit too long, I gotta tell you. Can we close the laptops for a second and have everybody stand up? All the way in the back. Let's just start with a little group calisthenics. Let's get a little stretch on. Stretch this way. Oh. Let's go this way. Oh. Let's go down. Oh. Oh. We're gonna stretch the fingers. You know why? What's this talk about? This talk is about Vim. Any Vim fans in the audience? Yeah! Do we have any Emacs fans in the audience? Ooh! All right, sit down. I'm glad we have Emacs fans, but this talk is about Vim. So, I just want to let you guys know before we get started, the point of this talk is not for me to just talk and get through it to the end. The point of this talk is for you to learn something. I hope that everyone in here can learn something, even the Emacs users. So please interrupt me. I love questions. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, but don't hesitate. Go ahead and throw those questions out. As soon as I confuse you, as soon as I say something that doesn't make sense, which will probably happen very quickly, interrupt me. Just get it going. So I'm going to do a quick survey also. Experience level. So this talk is expert level Vim. How many people would qualify themselves as an expert in Vim right now? Ooh, excellent. Okay. How about intermediate? All right. How about beginner? Okay, cool. So this is the funny thing about conference talks, right, is you give it a title that tells you who the audience is, but a bunch of people show up anyway. So don't worry, I planned for this. So I'm going to actually start off with a couple beginner tips. So this is mostly going to be about intermediate level Vim topics, how to go from sort of an medium level Vim user to a more powerful, faster Vim user. But I do want to start with a couple basic beginner tips. The first of which is don't be scared. So there's this learning curve associated with Vim that people get really frightened about. And I've been teaching Vim for a long time, I've been talking about it for a long time, and people will sometimes come up to me after the talk and say, that talk was really cool, I saw what Vim could do, it seems awesome, but I don't have like 3 months to go learn an editor. And like these people, I understand where this comes from. Vim is a bit hard to learn, it's not simple, but it's no harder than a programming language. Vim is just a programming language for editing text. So if you've learned Ruby, you can learn Vim. You absolutely have it in you. So don't be scared. Don't be intimidated. The second advice is if you're a brand new Vim user, brand new person, Vim Tutor is your friend. If you go to your shell, you type VIMTUTOR, no space, and Vim will launch in a special mode with a help file loaded for you that's going to walk you through the absolute basics of Vim. It's very straightforward. It's only going to take you a half an hour. In half an hour, you will have everything you need to do to get work done. You can open files, you can edit files, you can make the edits you need to do. You won't be fast, but just like a normal programming language, you can pick up the syntax, the basic ideas, in about half an hour. By the end of your first day, you're getting some stuff done, you're accomplishing things, you're pretty proficient within a week, and then it's the next part that takes a long time, right? It takes years really to master things. I've been using Vim for almost a decade now. I still learn new stuff about it all the time. It's just a massive editor. But you can get going in half an hour. So don't be afraid. Start with Vim Tutor. It helps to have a friend that can help you out because you're going to have a ton of questions in the beginning. If you don't have a friend that you can ask quick questions to, reach out to me on Twitter. I love helping people learn this stuff. So let's move on to the intermediate people, which is sort of the bulk of people. Makes sense. We're sort of in the middle of the Gaussian curve, right? So what holds people at low intermediate level? Well, most people learn the basics of Vim, and then they get a little bit stuck. And I think there are a few common trends I see in these people that aren't that fast with Vim. They're capable, but not quick. The first is that they are not obnoxiously intolerant of typing. This is how I describe myself. I hate typing. I will never use 2 keystrokes when I can do 1. I'm obsessed with this, and you need to be obsessed with it too. That's the most important part of mastering Vim, getting really fast with it, is hating typing. You have to have this mentality all the time. Every time you do something, this is taking way too long. I hate doing this. You gotta be thinking about this all the time. And the most important things to be aware of are the things that you do frequently. So how many people have ever saved a file in Vim? Do you think you do this about 100 times a day? Probably, right? If you save a handful of times an hour, over an 8-hour day, you probably do this 100 times. 100 times a day, 5 days a week, 50-ish weeks a year, depending on what your vacation policy is. Over a 10-year block, that's 250,000 times you're going to go ahead and save a file. Now, the way that you save a file in Vim by default is you hit escape from insert mode, you hit shift, W, enter, right? 5 keystrokes. So that's 1.25 million keystrokes just for saving over a decade. Now, I've been programming for about a decade, somewhere around there, but I hope to program for many decades. Now, the way I save in Vim is I've mapped something. I looked at this after not too long and said, this is way too many keystrokes. I don't have time for this. And so I use Control S. I have that mapped to do the exact same thing as those keystrokes I told you. So I have 2 keystrokes. So over a 1-year period, or 10-year period, I save 750,000 keystrokes. And this is actually kind of a big deal. It's these little things that actually matter. So it matters for speed, that's one thing. It actually really adds up over the course of days and weeks and years. But also it matters for your health. If you've ever known anybody that had RSI issues, if you've had them yourself, if your wrists have hurt, if your fingers have hurt, that can end your career. That's a career ender for programmers, and not a lot of things like that. So 750,000 keystrokes is kind of a big deal. I want to be doing this for a long time. I assume you do. So pay attention to this. This is worth paying attention to. So another thing, you want to be intolerant of doing things frequently that take a long time. So another good way of doing this, I bind a lot of leaders. Let's take a look at my Vim RC real quick. Here's my Vim RC. I want to scroll down to my leader. So leader commands are basically ways of binding short mappings to longer commands. So we have over here like line 41. I'm mapping leader A equals to this longer tabularize / equals sign. This just lines some things up. Doesn't really matter, but you can see I have about 60 or 70 leader commands. This is actually a huge, huge part of why I'm so fast in Vim. So think about something you do all the time. We're Rails developers here, right? You open your schema all the time. Shift, E, db / schema, RB. Maybe you have a slightly faster way. I have a leader command for that, leader SC. Think about opening factories RB if you use factory girl, which I hope you do. Leader F for me. Anything I'm doing that takes too many keystrokes, that I'm doing all the time, I'll put a leader in. I have a very low tolerance for typing things very many times. Leader T, line 84, it's another one of my favorite mappings. That actually runs a little function I wrote in Vim script. I'm going to cover a little bit of that in a bit. But these are things that make massive improvements in my speed as a developer. The other thing to look out for are operations that are infrequent but really slow. Do we have any RSpec users in the house? Cool, me too. So something you find yourself doing pretty frequently as an RSpec user is taking something you've assigned a variable to and pulling that onto a let, right? I'm a fan of lets, generally. So you'll it's just a pretty quick mechanical operation. It takes about 15, 20 keystrokes, but I do it a handful of times a day. How about another one's extract method, for example. You've got something in a method, you want to pull out this logic, you want to associate a name with it, go back here and call it. A very simple refactoring. I definitely do this a dozen times a day. I definitely do. I imagine you do too. But they're mechanical, right? You can write a macro in Vim that will do this for you. Every time you run that macro, you save those keystrokes, you save your hands, you save the time, and you're programming just a little bit faster than the next guy. The thing is, it doesn't make you a faster programmer, right? It's not going to make you think faster, but it shortens the distance between thought and code looking like you want it to. It makes that tighter and smaller, and that lets you go faster overall, increases your overall throughput. So pay attention to those things too, things you do infrequently but take a long time. One other thing I do a lot is I make a lot of typos. Imagine you guys do as well. So in Vim, you quit it by saying : lowercase q. And because my finger is on shift for the colon, I was frequently hitting capital Q. And Vim will complain and say, that's not a command. So I did that about 200 or 300 times, then I said, this is ridiculous, and then I mapped it. I just made : capital Q do the same thing as lowercase q. I do this in my shell aliases all the time as well. Instead of git push, I type git ps all the time. And so I just bound that. It's like, you know what? Rather than try to retrain my fingers, which has been really hard and wasn't working, I'm just going to accept my typos and move on. I have an intolerance of typing and intolerance of fixing mistakes that I've made all the time. So here's another great way to break out of this low intermediate level is to have a cheat sheet. So Vim is huge. The only way to learn it is a tiny bit at a time. And you have to make that little bit muscle memory. And then you learn a little bit more, and a little bit more. And the only way to do this effectively, I found, is with a cheat sheet. So I'm always trying to learn 7 ± 2 commands on a little sheet about this big on my desk. And so I write down what I'm trying to work on, and I try to remember to use them, and then I look at them when I want them. And the process is, hopefully I'm getting into my brain if it's useful, but after a while I'm not using this command, gone. Kill it, don't need it. And once you got it in your brain, also get rid of it. Put something new on there. And you're slowly packing these little bits of knowledge into your head. and you turn them into muscle memory, which is how you get really fast. Another great sign, another great way to become a better Vimmer is with a great VimRC. So there are some people that are very proud of empty VimRCs. They're like, oh, I'm completely stock, I don't use any plugins. And that's fine. And there are some system administrators that have a constraint. They need to do that because they're using all kinds of machines. It's too annoying to bring the VimRC in and blah, blah, blah. But for programmers, we're typically working on 1 or 2 machines all the time. So you should be slowly growing your VimRC just like you're slowly growing your muscle memory. It should grow roughly linearly with your skill. I have a friend, his name is Mike Burns, and Mike is an awesome programmer, and he's really fast, and he's really efficient. And he says that one of his secrets is he has an amazing VimRC. And this guy is so intense about this, but he won't release it. He won't show it to people. He'll occasionally put a little snippet up somewhere and let someone see what he's got. And I'm like, Mike, what are you doing? Everyone else puts their VimRCs in public repos and things like that. And he said, well, it's my secret sauce. And I kind of get that. Having a really awesome, finely tuned VimRC makes a huge difference. You're going to be so much faster because of it. Final thing is, of these sort of high-level ideas of holding intermediate people back is they often don't know how to read the manual. Going to RTFM. So it's pretty basic. :H is your friend. And the great thing about the Vim help is as soon as you get there, it tells you how to start navigating the help. So these bottom lines here are how to search for specific commands of different types, normal mode commands, visual mode commands. And if you scroll down, there is an awesome section here that's worth reading. So getting started, if you're new, this is really good. And then once you're a little bit here, once you're a little bit farther along for intermediates, editing effectively is great. It's worth reading just about every one of these, except for exploiting the GUI, because you shouldn't use GUIs. No menus, no mouse. Don't use the mouse. Stay away from that, okay? All right, so those are the high-level things. Let's talk about some sort of lower-level, more specific things that hold people back. One is using the arrow keys. So Vim has this amazing design decision, which is that moving a cursor up 1 character, down 1 character, left or right 1 character is HJKL, right in the home row. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Keep your hands right here on the keyboard. No needing to go over here, well, for you guys, over here for the arrow keys. This is an awesome design decision. Most people will use HJKL, but I find that somewhere around 20-ish% of people have a secret shame, and their secret shame is they use those arrow keys. I see some people that look a little guilty right now. This guy's nodding. So stay away from the arrow keys. All you gotta do is just never do it again. That's it. Starting right now, starting immediately, never ever do it again. Learn HJKL. It's easy, it's fast, it's awesome. I understand why people get there because they load up the help the first time. They're like, what? You use this for moving the cursor around? And they freak out and they go to the arrow keys. I understand. But just don't ever do it. Trust me. When you send me an email in 3 days because you're used to it and now you love it, I will accept your thanks with magnanimity. Magnanimity. Okay, so here's an anti-pattern for people that get stuck in intermediate level Vim. They're slow to move between files. So I spend a lot of time typing things like :E app/models/user.rb. If they're a little bit faster, they use tab complete. But I think both these ways actually are not very good for navigating between files in Vim. I have 2 favorite things I use. One is Command-T. If you've used TextMate, it's a very similar thing. It's a fuzzy finder matcher. So if I want to go to user spec, I just type USSP, for example. And I'm just grabbing individual letters in the file name, and it does a fuzzy match on that, and we'll sort it and let you open it very quickly. Actually, the only downside of Command-T is it's very finicky. It's written in Ruby, C, and Vim script, so you would be finicky too. And so I actually broke it last night. I was trying to compile Vim by hand with some cool stuff in there, and I managed to break this. So I'm not going to demo for you, but take a look for it. Take a look at it. It's Command-T. It's awesome. The other thing is Rails.Vim. Rails.Vim is great. I'll show you real quick. So here we are in the user model. So Rails.Vim basically gives you a bunch of Vim commands that let you effectively navigate between files in Vim. Because this is what we spend a lot of time doing as programmers, is going between files. So I'm here in this user model, and I do TDD, so I typically will have a vertical split open with user spec on one side. So Rails.Vim gives you a number of commands that start with R. Tab, here's a number of them. And these are basically for jumping around. So let's say I wanted to go to the unit test associated with that user model. We're now in the user spec. So let me go back to user. So I can jump from model to unit test, for example. There's jumps for everything. You can go from model to its line in the schema where that table is created. You can go from a controller action to the view that's associated with the controller action. And Rails Vim is pretty smart. It knows how to guess what the file names are. It also lets you do awesome stuff like split. So I can vertically split the unit test for this user model. And on the left You can't see because the file names are truncated, but on the left is user spec, and on the right is the user model. And so naturally, because I use this all the time, I have this bound to a leader command, because I wouldn't type :rv unit test all the time. For me, it's leader vu. Simple stuff, but worth knowing. So you want to get quick at moving in between files. Don't waste time there. Also, once you're within a file, don't waste time moving around within it. So here's another anti-pattern. Holding J, holding K, holding L. These are all Vim anti-patterns. So let's say I'm up here, and I want to go change on line 20. Actually, let's go a little bit. Let's say a has attached file. That's easier to see. Let's say I want to change has attached head instead. So I want to go down to line 14. I'm not going to hold down J. I have a couple options. The first, what I would use is I'd probably type 14G, capital G. That will jump me to line 14. You can see I have line numbers on the right, by the way. I recommend that. It's a set number. I'm a big fan of that. Another option I have for getting down there is just a search. So I would probably, if I wanted to change file to head, I would search for file. And I got lucky and I got right there. And I can just do change word head there. So I'm moving around quickly within this file. One other option you can have that some people like, if you have the latest Vim, is relative number. Some people at Thoughtbot are like really excited about this. So watch the numbers as I move this cursor. So the numbers are relative, of course, to wherever your cursor is. Now this is kind of cool because I can say, okay, I want to delete this whole address decimal line because it's duplicated? That's weird. So let's duplicate that. So I can say, I know that's 012, that's 3 different lines. I can say 3DD, and it's gone. It's easy to see how far a text distance is, and you can just say, delete 11 different things, delete 11 lines. Some people, only reason I don't like this is for pairing. It's like, oh, can you change that thing? What thing? Oh, on line 9, 8, no, 5 now. Well, 0, you got it. Kind of annoying. So I pair a decent amount, so I don't like relative number. I'm a fan of just straight up old school number. Another anti-pattern, not knowing your motions. So in Vim, you have commands, which are verbs, and then motions, which are your nouns. And so you tell Vim, delete a word. You say DW, and delete is your verb, and W is your noun, it's your word. And word is a motion, or a text object. Vim understands what text objects and what motions are. So you should know these motions. Here is a quick way to see it. Cursor motions. It's in the help. Again, RTFM, it's worth it. These are all the motions. But you don't dive in there and learn all of them at once. You put a couple little ones on your cheat sheet, right? Keep it manageable. Here's an example of just a couple quick motions that you should definitely know. Let's go to here. So if I want to change this word, I would say CW. W is a text object. It tells Vim, change this next word. Another one, till. Let's say I wanted to change up until the space here. I could say T. C, T, change till the space. And then we'll get rid of everything up into the space, put me in insert mode. Another awesome one is find. Let's say I wanted to blow away this first argument for whatever this API changed, and this image thing is no longer necessary. So I could put my cursor here and say delete find space, and that would delete delete find space, and that deletes up until and including the space. So till goes up to one before, find includes it. Another one is inside. So let's see. Here we are. We're inside a pair of parens. So I can say this whole method, everything inside this square needs to change. Change inside parens. Vim will blow away everything inside there, and then put me in insert mode in there. I can also say around A, so I can say delete around parens if I wanted to. That will get rid of also the enclosing as well. So you want to learn those motions. One more. This whole method sucks. So we don't delete the whole thing. We'll undelete this paragraph. Delete around paragraph, DAP. Gone. Super fast, right? So it's worth knowing these text objects and these motions. This is a really great way to speed yourself up. A couple more things. Big one, macros. Macros is another one of those things that kind of scare people. And macros are a little bit of an art. There are a couple tricks you need to know to get them reusable. It's easy to record a macro that works in one spot. It's a little bit harder to record a macro that works in a bunch of spots. So let's do one right now. I talked earlier about refactoring a let, or a variable assignment into a let. So let's actually do that with a macro. Let's record a macro that does that right now. So here's a very simple spec. We have these two things right here, Bob and Albert. They're both factory girl calls, and I want to turn them into let Bob and then block be factory teacher. So let's record a macro. So I'm going to start recording a macro by hitting Q and then telling it where I want to record to. So Vim will record a macro into something called a register. And a register is just like a small clipboard. And the important thing to know about macros is they're just keystrokes. That's all a Vim macro is. It records literally exactly what you type and then retypes that. There's nothing fancy, there's nothing binary going on, it's just keystrokes. So I'm recording right now. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is enter insert mode with an I, and then type let, open, and then symbol. Now I'm going to leave insert mode, and I'm going to go to the end of this word. So I want to finish wrapping this let around Bob. And so I can't use the right. I can't go right a couple characters, because and I want it to work on Albert too. And I want it to work on anything. I want it to be arbitrary. So I'm going to use a motion again. I'm going to say end, E for end. That means go to the end of the current word. So Vim happily does that. Bump this up a little bit more. There we go. Vim happily goes to the end of the word, and so now I'm going to append with A, close paren, and I'm going to leave insert mode once again. So now I'm going to go find the equal sign by F equals. Vim will jump there, and then delete twice. And then I'm going to use something called surround.vim, which is a Tim Poe plugin, which is awesome. You need this as well. It's for managing surrounding things, like surrounding parens, surrounding curly braces. It also lets you work really efficiently with HTML. Definitely worth your time. Check that out. So I want to basically wrap a block around this. So I'm going to say YS to here, boom. And surround.vim inserts both pairs of those. All right, so the macro is done now, so I'm going to hit Q again to stop recording. And now if I've done everything correctly, I can go down to Albert and then run that macro, which is just at, and then the register that has a macro inside it. This happens to be Q this time. Oh, and we've lost the wrap. You can see it's on the next line. You can see we've succeeded. It worked. We got the let around Albert, and we wrapped the other side around these curly braces. Now I can easily save this macro off somewhere and use it anytime I want to do this refactoring ever again. Save myself a bunch of time. But so I told you that macros are literally just keystrokes. So let's look at the macro we just recorded. So I'm going to paste from register Q. So you can tell Vim this by saying this is double quote Q put. So I'm giving it saying from the Q register, put that thing I just recorded. And there's what it looks like. Let's go to the top. There we go. So that's literally just the recordings of the exact keystrokes I did. I entered insert mode. I typed let open colon. This is a control character for escape. I went to the end of the word, I appended a close paren, I found the equal sign, deleted two things, and then I added this weird thing at the end that told surround.vim, surround this thing with curlies. Now, just to prove to you that there's nothing special about this, I'm going to actually change this let to foo, okay? So now I have a line of text that represents my macro, except it's now calling the foo method instead of the let method. And I'm actually going to read this back into the Q register. So I'm going to say double quote, Q, yank, yank. So now I've updated the Q macro. So let's go back to how we were. And I'm now going to run at Q on this guy, the new macro I just recorded. And on this guy. You can see we've changed that. So again, it's just keystrokes. So the cool thing is you can write a macro, and if you mess it up, you can just dump it, edit it back up, and then load it back in, and it'll work. So you can actually even have commands in your vimRC that will load these macros in various registers for you. So maybe you always walk around with like this in your L register. And so whenever you want to refactor a let, you just go, and then you've got your let refactored. One final thing, VimScript. VimScript also has a bad rap, partially correctly. It's a bit of an ugly language, but it's not that bad. It's just as easy to learn as any other programming language you've ever learned. The best way to do it, Steve Loesch has an awesome guide for it. It's called Learning VimScript the Hard Way. And it's really excellent. That's what I used to get up to speed. Ever since I did, I've started writing these little functions for myself. Let's look at one real fast. Let's just call it correct. So it's correct test runner. I mentioned this one earlier. So I'm frequently running RSpec specs and Cucumber features. And I do this by shelling out. I say colon, bang, RSpec, and then the file name. I run it right from my editor. That's another thing, by the way. Never leave your editor if you can, if you don't have to. So this correct test runner thing says, this is VimScript, it's very simple. It's a function, takes no arguments. If, when I expand %, which is a shorthand for the current file name, and that matches, if it ends in .feature, then return cucumber. Otherwise, if it ends in .specRB, return RSpec. Otherwise, return Ruby. And I use this down here in run current test to fill in the correct test runner on this line right here. Because maybe I want to run bang cucumber, or maybe RSpec, or maybe Ruby. So like I think you guys probably understand this. This is pretty easy to read. The only tricky thing with VimScript is there's some weird gotchas, some things that if you designed another programming language from scratch, you would never decide to do. But once you get those mastered, which are not very hard, and Steve will point them out for you, it's really, really powerful to be able to script your editor. So don't be afraid of that. It's another thing that's a bad rap. So a lot of people at the end of talks like to pimp things. I'm going to do that, only it's not something for me. So I met Drew Neal recently. He's the guy behind vimcast.org, and he just wrote a book. And it looks like this. And I think it's going to be awesome. If you've used Vimcast, or you've seen stuff on vimcast.org, they're awesome. Really good screencast for learning Vim. I definitely recommend checking that out. And he's a good guy. He just finished this book. It's entering beta now. You can buy it. And also, I talked to him and got a discount code. So here we go. Railsberry, capital VIM 2012. 25% discount on that if you do it. Please don't actually share that. I think it's just for people at this conference. But if you're interested in the book, go for it. I think it'll be a good read. I can't say I've read it yet, but he's a good guy, and I think he's going to do it well. That's all I have. This is my content information. My dot files are up on GitHub. There are 80 people watching my dot files. You might find stuff interesting in there. A big fat vimrc and a bunch of functions and aliases and stuff like that. And love to take your questions. Yeah.
Vim has a lot of funny things, a lot of good things. What is your, for example, top 3 favorites?
Top 3
functions.
Functions in Vim?
Yeah.
VimScript functions?
No, for example, I love dot repetition operation, or I love this particular columns selection.
Yeah.
What are your favorites?
Dot is a big one. Dot repeats whatever your last command was, just does it again, which is really cool because if, for instance, you're changing a bunch of references from foo to bar, you can say change word bar, and then to do a search for foo, and I'll hit N to go to the next search, and dot to repeat that last replacement. N dot, N dot, N dot, N dot, N dot. Really fast. I like dot a lot. That's a big one. I've actually found myself using recently X commands. So when you type colon, you can type colon 10, comma 20, M15, or M30. That will move lines 10 to 20 onto line 30. So Vim it stands for visual. Vim was the visual part. It used to be an editor called X, which you use just by typing these commands right on a command line. You couldn't even see what you were doing. So it still maintains X mode. It lets you do these crazy text manipulations, but very terse and keyboard based. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Do you know a way of making Vim execute the code asynchronously? For example, running tests, just not to wait for them?
That's a good question. No.
Okay. Pity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you some tips how to efficiently deal with too many tabs?
Too many tabs?
Yes.
Don't open too many tabs. Kind of. So I use tabs not that much. So I'm a big fan of splits. So I have a big monitor, so I'll typically split, almost always 2 or 3 or 4 times. Often like I'll have 6 panes, things like that. So I tend to do a lot of my work in splits because I like to be able to see code in front of me. To me, that's the value. It's like you can reference what's over here when you're looking over here. I'll typically only pop stuff open into tabs if it's unrelated. It's like, oh, what was that weird thing in that file? New tab, and then check that out, and then close that and come back. So I typically, or for instance, I'll do my outside into development, right? So I have Cucumber feature, Cucumber step defs in a split over here, and like I get this to the point where I want to now dive down a level, new tab, come over here, RSpec production code over here, maybe you have to dive down another level over here, and I'll put these all in separate tabs. And so that each one sort of represents a logical grouping of that code. And I'll sort of work my way left to right depending on what I need to do. Also, I wrote a function in my vimrc, or someone at Thoughtbot wrote a function that's in my vimrc called merge tabs, which will let you take a tab and merge it back into the previous window as a split, which Vim doesn't have stock, but is actually a really handy thing that I found myself doing. Yeah. Next.
I see you were using regular Vim. Some people recommend MacVim or GVim in Linux. What are the differences and what do you think of them? Thank you.
MacVim is nice because it gives you better color schemes, at least until you have the better color schemes. I'm not running Lion, so I have the old terminal with the old like 16 colors or something, or 256, I forget. So MacVim is nice because it's prettier. I think the fonts look a little bit nicer. The reason that I got away from it is because when I run my tests from inside Vim, which I do all the time, and they show up at the bottom of Vim, I have like red-green highlighting on there, and MacVim doesn't support ASCII codes in that output, so it looks all messed up, and that's pretty much my only reason. Also, because you see, I'm using Screen, which is awesome. Like you guys should definitely be either using Screen or Tmux. I got a bunch of stuff, different windows open down here, or different screen portals basically. So I like having everything in one thing. I got Vim in one screen session. I got a bunch of terminals in the other ones. So I don't like alt tabbing. I'd rather just switch within screen. Yep.
Maybe related to the last question. Whenever I tried to get into Vim under macOS, I got pretty frustrated by the conflicts between macOS use of the control key and its need in Vim. Did you experience that? And if yes, what are your solutions or suggestions on how to deal with it?
I've experienced that a little bit. I've basically limited the things that I bound to control something. So I use Control S for writing files, as I told you earlier, and that's actually, I think one of my only control bindings, because like you said, terminal will happily gobble up other ones it claims for itself. So I don't think there's an easy way around that. I don't know if you can rebind terminals commands easily. Wouldn't be totally shocked if you could though.
Okay, what about refactorings? I mean, we have in full IDEs, we have lots of refactorings, like rename method, rename local variable, introduce variable, extract method, pull members up, and so on and so on.
Yep.
Is this easily available in Vim somehow?
Yes, you can do a lot of those things. So some of that stuff is a little bit trickier in a dynamic language like Ruby, so that's what I work in most frequently. So I haven't sought out some of those, but you can write some of them yourself. Like I showed you that macro that we did just now. So it's possible to write simpler things. If you need a little more complexity, you can write Vim script to do them. I think there's also there's a plugin for Vim that's, I can't remember the exact name, but it has refactoring in it. So I would search for like, what's that?
Ruby Refactor.
Ruby Refactor? How's it work?
It's quite nice.
It's quite nice. Ruby Refactor.
Okay.
So yeah, I think somebody has written a lot of that Vim script for you.
Thanks.
Sure. Going here, one there. Yeah, so the question was, do I have any tips for keeping your wrists healthy? And I absolutely do, because I had a serious bout of RSI. I had to take time off work. I was really scared. So I did a bunch of things that really helped, actually. So I got a keyboard tray, which got my hands nice and low, keep them pretty neutral. I also have an awesome keyboard. It's called a Kinesis. It's like a $300 keyboard. It's insane, but it's awesome. So the keys are split, like Microsoft keyboard. They're really split. Backspace, Enter, page down, page up. All those extra keys are on your thumbs, including basically you have the letter keys, and then everything else is on your thumbs. So I hit Enter with my thumb. I hit Backspace with my thumb. I hit Space with my thumb, which is normal, but that gets a lot of stuff off the pinkies, because that's what was hurting me. Was like reaching up to escape, reaching up to backspace, hitting enter, like that motion was what was hurting. And so this thing lets you stay here and just use your thumbs for that sort of thing. It also puts the keys in like bowls. They're sort of down like this. So if you look at your keyboard, the keys are offset. Like it's not a straight line from top to bottom. They're sort of diagonal like this. I don't think there's really a good reason for that. I think that's just sort of was how things were done, and it continues today. So these keys are actually all straight up and down, which kind of makes sense, because if you think of your fingers curving up and down, why shouldn't this all be the same column of keys? So it does a number of smart things that basically make typing easier. And basically every time I'm not typing on this keyboard, I don't like it. It's really awesome. It's really expensive. It also comes with foot pedals, which I've been dying to get. So like you can have a foot pedal for like escape or something. Yeah, right. Or run all your tests. Or like ship it, something. I don't know. So. Oh, right. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. How are we for time?
Yeah, 5 solid minutes.
5 solid minutes. I think there was over here.
Yeah, it's not a question, but just wanted to say about Drew Neal's book, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
I've read it. It's awesome.
Great.
So you should buy it and also support Drew Neal, who's a very amazing person.
Cool.
So
Yeah, he's a good guy. I'll put that code up there just again, just to make sure if anybody wanted it. Cool. Thanks. Appreciate that. Anything else? Oh, yeah.
Hi there. So my question is, how often, if at all, you're using visual mode to, select some text or?
Pretty frequently.
Cool. Really?
Yeah.
But it's a lot of typing,
It is. Yeah, it's actually one of the areas where I could be a little more efficient. So that thing I showed you with DAP, delete all paragraph, which blew away the whole method, I often forget about that, and I'll.
Shame on you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that needs to be on my cheat sheet. You're absolutely right. So I need to highlight. I usually highlight it and then go down a couple lines and then delete it, which is just a little bit slow. I also really love what's it called? Column select. What's that name? Control V. What's block select? Yeah, block select is awesome. You're changing a bunch of things or like anything that's in a vertical column. I'm a big fan of that. That works really well for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, any more questions, guys?
Yeah, one more.
Oh, one here too.
One short tip. When I just started Vim,
yep.
One of the best things I did is remapping. I don't know if you mentioned it, but remapping the control,
yep.
caps lock,
yep.
is one of the best things I did.
What'd you remap it to?
Caps lock.
What'd you change it to?
Control.
Control, okay. So I'm a huge fan of that. I remap caps lock to escape. It's the staying on the home row idea. Rather than reaching all the way up to escape, I think that's one of the only so when Vim was originally created, escape was very easy to reach. If you look at those old school keyboards, escape is really handy to reach. Now it's sort of stuck up in the corner, so I remapped that to escape. But I also find, I know a lot of other people map caps lock to control.
Yeah.
But I actually don't use that many control-based commands in Vim, I find. If I were doing Emacs, I absolutely would. So I just do it for escape.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's worth looking into. I think it was here too. I can just repeat the question too if you're.
Hello. First of all, plugins. Would you recommend to have plenty or just stick into pure Vim and not use plugins at all? For instance, I use Nerdtree, but some people don't like it or recommend Command T, etc. Do you use a lot of plugins? Oh, no.
Those are the plugins I use. That's a little bit tough to read, sorry. This is also not much better, is it? No. Okay. I use SuperTab, Vim CoffeeScript, T-Comment, Vim Cucumber, Vim Fugitive, Vim Surround, Vim Rails, Vim Ruby, and Command T. And like half of that's written by T-Pope, of course. I'm a big fan of plugins. I don't think you should jam them in. Like a lot of people are big fans of Janus, for example, which ships with it's a sort of a pre-configured Vim configuration, has a bunch of plugins in it, has a bunch of mappings for you. I don't like that. I think you should grow it yourself. I think you should start with stock Vim and a tiny vimRC, and then slowly grow the vimRC, slowly add plugins, try them out. So you really know what functionality is coming from where. I'm a fan. Just add them slowly. That's my recommendation.
It's kind of part of this question.
Yeah.
For a long time, I was kind of scared of mappings and things like that because, for instance, when I work on a different environment on the server side, I don't have my vimRC there. So I kind of liked always to have a pure Vim command so I knew what to use.
Sure.
So I was always scared to add any mappings, anything, because I could kind of forget or
yep.
It would be removed from my muscle memory. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that? Shall I keep on adding stuff or just...
Do you have your vimRC in a repository?
Yes.
Okay. Can you pull that repository down to the other server?
No, because of security reasons. There's plenty.
In your own home directory?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's tricky. If you really can't get a vimRC on there locally, then you might have a point where you don't want to add mappings, because it's going to annoy you when they're not there. I guess you have to just sort of look at it and decide how annoying is that, and how much time you're actually spending on machines where you can't even edit inside your home directory. And because it's a massive speed gain to be able to map your own stuff. I mean, it's huge.
Sure.
So if it's not a lot of time spent on boxes that you have no control, I think I'd just suffer through it and be like, okay, sometimes I can't use what I have, but when I'm on my home setup, I'm fast.
Okay.
So that's what I would go with.
Cheers.
Sure.
Last chance to ask a question.
Going over here.
I think it will be the final one, right?
Okay, sure. Talk to me afterwards. I'll be around.
There is one more question.
Yep, sure.
Okay, it's not actually a question, so just wanted to say that DAP doesn't really work when you want to refactor a method, like delete it, if you have empty lines in it. But you can use d%, which is really cool. So if you're...
right. Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so if you're, when you define the method or in the end and you use %, it moves to the beginning of the definition of the block, or at the end if you're at the beginning, so that's really handy.
Right, that's good.
It's really useful.
That's very good advice, yeah. DAP doesn't work if there's not white space on the other side, that's what you're saying? Or if you have a line that has like spaces on it? Yeah. Okay, yeah, sure, good advice. All right, so I'll be around, feel free to ask me questions, I love talking about this stuff. Thank you all very much.